Welcome. I'm Dr. Lisa Toppin, excited to welcome you to our uh, 2022 inaugural input of Inputs to Action. And I am pleased to welcome Dr. Tshaka Cunningham, who is the co founder and chief scientific officer of Polaris Genomics and Illumina Accelerator, which is a startup. They've been in business for 3.5 years, minority owned, veteran owned, and they are going like gangbusters. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with him because I think not only are we going to learn more around what genomics is really all about, but we're going to get into what it means from a diversity and inclusion perspective. So, first of all, welcome, Dr. Cunningham. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Top, and I'm excited to chat with you today and share some insights I've gained on my journey.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know the audience will too, because you've had quite the journey already. So I want you to take us back. Now, I have to say to the audience, like he's a homeboy with me. Like he's a DC guy, I'm a DC girl. We got that. But take us to your formative years. Now you grew up as a guy, you have worked in government, academia, nonprofit, the pharmaceutical industry, and now you are a scientist in genomics. You've worked in vaccines, cancer research, molecular biology, and biotechnology. So you covered the gamut. I can't even imagine fitting all of those things in a career that's just this far. But can you take us in on how you got to this space in this moment?
Yeah, it's been an evolution and just a great journey. And as I'm getting towards the middle stages of my career now, and the next 25 years I'll probably retire, but the first 25 have been amazing. And I came from very humble beginnings. I was born in inner city Washington to my mom, when she was a freshman at Howard University. So I actually say I'm an HBCU product because I was born at Howard, right? in University at the Friedman Memorial Hospital back in the 70s.
Wow.
And, my mom, being a 19-year-old freshman, carried me to class, on her back. I've been in school my whole life, right? Since I was a baby sitting in there. My mom was an artist. She graduated summa cum laude in fine arts and, was a Fulbright scholar. And she's one of my inspirations in arts. My mom is a really artistic person and really studied African art, and my introduction to science came from my grandmother. She was one of those hidden figure types.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the movie Hidden Figure about the Black women like Katherine Johnson and her colleagues at NASA that really empowered our space program. My grandmother was kind of like that, but on the biology front, and did cancer research at the National Cancer Institute for 35 years. But in an era before Black women were even allowed to get PhDs in this discipline. So I got my first exposure to science from my grandmother during the summers. We didn't have a lot of money, so they couldn't afford to send me to summer camp. So I'd go to the lab with my grandmother, and she taught me everything about the foundations of science that I've carried with me for the last 40 years. And it was just a wonderful experience, learning from my grandmother how to look at cancer cells. She did research on non-small cell lung cancer and genetics way back when, before we had NGS sequencing and before companies like Illumina existed. She was looking at MYC oncogene mutations and how they affect lung cancer. And so I say with straight face, my grandmother has more academic publications than I do. I'm one of the few people that can say that. And before she died, she really imparted a lot of that knowledge and inspiration in me to pursue a career in science. At least sparked that curiosity in me, because I always wanted to learn how all this stuff worked. And that just motivated me to really dig deep on the academic side and start to fill in the gaps. Mm-hmm. And so I've had a really rich experience in the lab because of that. I started out with a strong foundation that kind of kept me going even when things got tough. And I kind of make the analogy to Tiger Woods. Like his dad exposed him to golf as a baby, right? So he'd been playing golf for 20 years by the time he came on the stage. So for him, it was probably a little easier because he worked really hard at it, but he also learned what he needed to do. And that's how I've looked at science. Now, I'm not saying I'm the Tiger Woods of science yet. Can't say that until I win a Nobel Prize or something. But, I've had a great experience with it, and it started early.
Yeah.
And I'm really appreciative for that.
Yeah, well, you as you call that out, that takes us right into to Gladwell in terms of those 20,000 hours, and just, it's just a matter of when you start, but you still got to get them in. So, so appreciating hearing the story of your grandmother, that is really powerful in terms of the setup. But so then, so let's keep going. So then you went to, where'd you go? You went to Princeton.
Yeah, but
Okay.
before that, I went to public school and learned kind of the ropes, and had to build up my academic chops there, and then went to private school, a very wealthy private school in the DC area called St. Albans,
Mhm.
and then from St. Albans, got to the Ivy League in Princeton, and it was very interesting. I didn't even know. I grew up, in poor in the inner city. I didn't really know what an Ivy League school was and what that really meant, right?
Mhm.
Until I was kind of around a bunch of the private school kids who were all applying and all of this stuff. And what really encouraged me, I'll tell a story that encouraged me to even apply to the Ivies, because I wasn't even going to do it. I wanted to go to Morehouse and HBCUs. But part of the reason I applied for the Ivies is because one of my classmates suggested that I couldn't get in.
Ah.
And he was like, don't even bother applying, because you're Black, and so you're not good enough, so you're not going to get in. And so that was the medicine I needed, right? I'm like,
Okay.
I'm gonna show you, right? And then so I applied to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and got into the Ivies, and was able to have my choice. And that individual didn't. So that was a really kind of great moment for me.
Listen, yeah, we see in hindsight what was happening there. He was like,
Right.
if you apply, I'm not getting in. So let me try to discourage you, right?
I,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to show you. And this is my message to all the students out there and folks who are listening. If anybody ever tells you can't, you got to have that kind of mentality, because that was some of the most determined I'd ever been. I was like, I'm going to be the best academically, athletically, well-rounded, and I'm going to show you, right? Just because you put that chip on my shoulder. So again, got to Princeton, had a fantastic experience after my first 2 years, which were a little tough, because as a minority student coming to a predominantly white institution, that was challenging. That first couple of years, I kind of wanted to bail out and say go, but I think it was, the friendships I made there, the community that we formed there as African Americans, students who really had to fight for our space on campus, that taught me a lot and helped, empower me even today. So, and today I'm so proud I stuck it out and became a Princeton alum, because I have so many colleagues that are, people of color who are in that kind of Black Ivy League network. There's only not that many of us ever. And so we now have an opportunity to sort of make more opportunities for folks who didn't even go to these schools, and also who are going to HBCUs. And that's kind of what I've tried to do throughout my career.
Yeah. Well, I love the fact that you tell that story because we I think we see that that attrition you're talking about. Like you get there and it's hard, and it isn't about the academics or the rigor. It's about the isolation. It's about all of the other things that go around it. So that's the work inside companies, right? That we have to make it so that people don't feel that way. And so again, not I don't want to get distracted, but that was just such an important point around how somebody like you who's had 20,000 hours before you got there, so you're more than prepared, right? Is almost thinking about quitting because of the experience. And so it's just an important point.
No,
Okay, so
real.
you finish off Princeton and you decide then to.
I didn't really know really what I wanted to do. But again, we didn't come from a lot of resources, so I couldn't take a gap year, right? So I had to do something, right? So, it was an adventure for me to get to Princeton and actually be able to pay for Princeton. I had to get a scholarship and all of these things. So when I was coming out, I was pre-med and I did pretty well. So I could go to med school, but my heart wasn't really in it. I
Mm,
didn't ever really want to be in the clinic. I didn't really want to be dealing patients. I was pre-med because it was kind of the thing to do, right? What really excited me was the science, right? So when I was a molecular biology major at Princeton, and one of the reasons I chose Princeton over the other schools is because they had a major in molecular biology. So I could really get deep into the science that my grandmother had exposed me to.
mm,
And one of my mentors there was one of the leading oncology researchers in the world. He actually was a co-discoverer of an oncogene called P53 that is involved in 70% of human cancers. And he's still a mentor to me at this day, Dr. Levine, Arnold Levine. And having access and exposure to really incredibly, accomplished scientists like that, and them engaging you intellectually and letting you know that you belong, that a very foundational experience for me. So
Mhm.
that piece that you talk about feeling comfortable, even the areas where I was uncomfortable, maybe socially or campus life, and we had to kind of, make our own situation. Academically, I always felt pretty comfortable because of people like Arnie.
Wow.
And so like Dr. Levine, I call him Arnie
Mhm.
affectionately. But when I look at it, after that, I didn't know exactly whether I wanted to go to med school or grad school or whatever. So I said, well, look, let me take a step back and have a different experience, and let me try to get a job in pharma,
Mm,
right? Which
mhm.
at the time was kind of impossible. I didn't realize it, but I didn't have much sort of, corporate experience. So I sent out 100 resumes to pharma companies, and I was a pretty decent student at Princeton, so I thought I'd have a pretty good shot. I got 3 interviews, right? and
Okay.
one job offer, right? And so like a 1% hit rate, even being decent and had all even some background, but took advantage of that. Got that job, got in at the ground level as a young associate research scientist, and learned the ropes of the pharma business. And that was like a pre-PhD for me. So I
Mm,
worked for like 4 years in drug discovery, really learned how pharma worked, the business model of it. And it was just a fantastic experience. Got to learn from some great drug developers there, and took that knowledge with me to my PhD.
yeah.
That would just made my PhD so much more of an enriching experience because I kind of had an idea of the different jobs I could get once I got out of there, right? And so it was really, really great. So that was my path. So after college, I went straight to pharma and
Yeah.
worked for about 4 years at Bristol Myers and cardiovascular and metabolic drug discovery, and just at each level, just kept
Mhm.
proving myself and giving myself new opportunities to advance.
Yeah, no, so you make another important point. I got to stop and just point this out for the audience. So I hear all the time people talking about going back for graduate work, which I'm completely supportive of. But what you call out and what you experienced is the value of working before you do that. You can extract so much more value of the learning in a graduate program with work experience. So it's nice. I know people think it's nice to just punch the card and run all the way through, get done with school, and then hit the ground running. And that has worked for plenty of people. So I'm not saying that doesn't work, but what you just articulated really is, I think, an important point to just take a minute, take a breath, get some learning, and then you go in and you know what you're trying to really get to and understand. So great. Great, great, great. Okay, so then you go back for the doctorate now. So now you are headed back to Rockefeller University.
Yes. Best time of my life. I
Yes.
look at that. It's the movie Forrest Gump where he was playing ping pong and he was like, it just came natural to him.
Yeah.
That's how grad school was for me. It
Mm,
was I say to my students now that I mentor, a PhD is a degree in thinking. You're a philosopher.
right.
You're a doctor of philosophy. So you have to think very deeply to solve problems that we don't have the answers to. And that's the space I love being in, because that's where, innovation and being creative can really help you if that's your natural bent. And I think I took some of those elements of creativity and innovation that my mom's artistic side exposed me to with the technical components that my grandmother's science side exposed me to. And I kind of try to mix them up. And that's what I really love about science,
Yeah.
is trying to really apply creative thought and scientific method to solve big problems. And so I was like a round peg in a round hole. I mean, I really enjoyed it, had an
Mm,
incredible experience there, had some fantastic mentors, and really learned how to do science at a high level with my mentors at Rockefeller.
yeah. No, that's just it's an amazing story. And so here you are. You've touched all of these different spaces. So tell us a little bit about Polaris. What does Polaris do? And maybe
So,
you might have to give us a 101 on genomics as you go into this.
well, DNA 101 is, I like to say it's all about your DNA, right? It starts there. That's where the start is. And, we're at this inflection point in biology where we are able to, and health, understand more about an individual's genomics than ever before. And thanks to companies like Illumina that are making these technological advancements approachable and available to folks, and the cost of sequencing coming down over time to make it more available, and hopefully access will be democratized for everybody as the cost continues to come down.
Mhm,
We can learn about the different variants in our DNA
mhm,
and what those variants mean for our predisposition for diseases, as well as just, some, individual traits about us, right? So what we're doing at Polaris is really trying to use the power of genomics to improve our diagnosis and treatment of mental and behavioral health conditions.
Mm.
Right now, if you think about a condition like cancer, no one would give you a survey to see whether you had cancer.
Right.
They're going to give you a molecular pathology test or a molecular diagnostic test now. And now they can even take blood out of your blood from you and get cell-free DNA and look at your methylation variants and say you're predisposed, like Grail's test. So uh, it's so much more molecular and specific and objective in the field of cancer. Mental health, not so much, right?
Mm.
It's still very survey-based, question and answer, and therefore lots of gaps and lots of potential for there to be less positive predictive value, sensitivity, and specificity for the test. So what we're really trying to do is develop more objective screening measures for these conditions, and also to help stratify between the different conditions like major depression and PTSD and bipolar disorder that often have overlapping symptoms. So we're still at the early days of it. I mean, we're still a startup company, but I think we've made some great progress, at least in developing a product that can be used to probe this and to sort of give us some early insights for those folks who are most at risk for having bad outcomes for PTSD if they've experienced trauma.
Dr. Cunningham, this is, and I'm going to say, if we weren't on screen, I'd be calling you Tshaka, right? But in this moment, I got to call you Dr. Cunningham because what you've just described is such important work, particularly for our community. Because I'm in conversation with folks, I'm always talking about how the fact that I feel like, and I don't have any proof of it, so I got to call it a feeling and not a knowing, that so many of our jails are filled with people that have mental disorder and they're not criminal, right? And so and we've seen that play out over the news, right? Somebody makes a phone call for support because somebody's having a mental breakdown. We don't have the infrastructure to respond to that. And then it turns into a criminal and or police interaction. So it's just, I think it's obviously important for the world, but I am keenly aware of what it will mean for the African-American community in particular. So this is amazing.
And this is what we want to help discover. We want to help add to that. To be fair, our community's genomics hasn't been adequately studied. And as an African-American researcher and founder of a biotech company, I want to help fix that. And I do a lot of work in the community trying to educate our community about the importance of participating in genomic research and being represented, because I use an analogy from the book of Hosea that it says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Well, I say to my people, African Americans, this is knowledge of our genome. Our genomes is knowledge we can't afford to lack because it's going to affect our collective health. And so I think I hope that we see a reversal in some of the trends that have been going on for the last 20 years of genomics research, where a very small percentage, let's say less than 4%, have included all people of color, right? I'm talking about minorities, including African Americans, Latino Americans, and even Asian Americans. It's a very small subset that have contributed, and therefore we don't understand enough about our community's SNPs, that is single nucleotide polymorphisms, those mutations that may or may not be interesting in our disease propensity. So that's stuff that we need to know. So I hope that more of us are encouraged to do it. And that's a real focus of our company, right? When we're designing our clinical trials and designing our products, we have a real focus on making sure we have minority representation in our clinical cohorts. I hope more companies do the same.
That's so huge. But you said something that we got to go in on, because I shared a story not too long ago about the work you're doing with the Future Kings, and everybody was hitting me up. This is so great. This is so great. So I want to have some conversation about that before we close. So tell us about Future Kings, because you are in the community, you are doing it. So tell us about it.
That is one of my passions. My great grandmother used to say something to the effect like, service is the rent you pay for a living. I've heard that all over, but she's like, you have to live a life of service. And this is part of my life of service. It is one of the great honors of my life to be able to interact with and pour into these young people, particularly young African-American men that are in our program, that no one else gave a chance to, that people had labeled as at risk and incapable of learning. That when we get them and get them into the Future Kings program and they come through, they go from they might not be able to go to community college to they're choosing between their Ivy League college they want to go to.
Mm.
Right. So those are the young men that I've seen come through our program and have benefited. And the reason why I get so passionate and I love it so much is because I've seen that by exposing young people at an earlier age, let's say in sixth grade, to these advanced topics in molecular and cellular biology and in genomics, they can handle it and they can start to begin to think creatively about it as they learn the actual physical skills. And that was a real eye opener for me because I was kind of under your impression that, you needed to have more baseline and all of this stuff. But if you deliver the material in the right way and in an age appropriate manner to them, and you spend time with them sequentially over the years, then they can really, really benefit from it. So the program that we've had at Future Kings, the Biomed program, has been very exciting. And these kids are learning NGS sequencing. So thanks to a generous grant from the Illumina Corporate Foundation, we were able to teach them library prep and for them to sequence cells that were either resistant or susceptible to COVID. And then the second part of that project, after they looked at the genetic differences, is to take the genes that make the cells resistant, clone them out, and put them into the susceptible cells to see if they can make them resistant. So that could be a potential type of cure for COVID. Who knows, right? But they're learning the technology behind that, and that has been so exciting to watch them grow and learn these really kind of complex technologies before they even get to college.
Right. Well, this is not far from home for you because this is what your grandmother did with you, right?
It's basically the same thing. I want to give all of these young men the same opportunity I had to learn at an early age, and it prepares them better to go and stay in the career. Right. And the things that get me most excited is when I have that young man that comes in. He's never experienced biology before. He's never met a Black scientist. Right. And I'm their first touch point for that. And then they can see themselves doing it after they see an example of someone doing it. And I expose them to, our company's lab. We have actually a CLIA lab that we're doing NGS work in now with an Illumina eye scan instrument. So we, exposing them to that lets them know it's a possibility and it gets them inspired. And then just watching them grow and blossom into these young thinkers and future scientists is the joy of my life. That's one of the best things that I do during my week.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds amazing. And I think just in terms of inspiring the rest of us to figure out where we're going to get in and touch young people, I think is I don't know, the piece that I take from you the most. So here's my question though, because as we're talking about this, you're getting to, let's say, the young men that come through your program, but what is really the barrier, and how do we hurdle it in terms of getting more young people exposed and then interested and then sort of sustained through careers? Because even as you mentioned earlier, it can get shaky if you find yourself in a sort of an isolated scenario.
I mean, and a lot of it is, and that's a really great point. There's a set of coping skills that I think any particularly minority student that is in a predominantly non-minority environment has to acquire. And you got to develop some level of thick skin. And I'm going to call it psychological hardening, right? Because it's going to likely be harder for you. I mean, there's no other thing, because you're going to feel it's not going to be comfortable, right? And I think not every student is going to be good at doing that if they hadn't been coached to do that. So even our students, we prepare them a bit for that by talking about our real lived experience. So just like I'm talking about my experience with you, I've talked to my students about it and just encouraging them. I think starting them off from a place of confidence that you are just as good as anyone there, if not better. You always belong. That will nullify that phenomenon you also often see called imposter syndrome.
Yes.
So I think that's a real detriment to it, to the whole kind of increasing diversity, as folks feeling like they don't belong. And that's a really important piece, because even when folks are educated and capable, if they don't feel comfortable and engaged, they might not even choose that career path, and it'll, scare them off. And I think that's what scientists and science in general as a field needs to do a better job of is being really more welcoming and comforting for different communities. Now, I'm not saying you're going to coddle folks, but at the same time, you got to be aware if you've got folks in this sort of extreme isolation. So some of the advice I give the universities that I speak to that are trying to increase their diversity hire, I'm saying hire more than one Black professor, right? Like hire them in groups, right? Hire folks from to create this sort of diverse village. And I would say that to any large organization company as well, because you don't want that person just sort of being on the island, because not everybody's always going to have those same coping skills.
Right. And I think, I mean, and so thank you for saying that. And it is so true. I think if you can create sort of community, we know by definition, everybody isn't going to welcome you and everybody isn't going to support you. And that's true for everybody. Right. So it's, but recognizing that minorities in particular need some kind of connection and touch point community that can really help them, as you're saying, sort of steel yourself against some of the things that are going to come at you. And that's just a part of sort of the lived experience as we know it today. So I want to pay attention to our time. This is all about inputs to action. And so I always say, listen, you've given us great input. I mean, I'm taking tons of inspiration myself in terms of how I should start thinking about my reach for young people in certain ways. Won't be in genomics specifically, me teaching that, but genomics broadly through my role with Illumina and what I can support and facilitate. But what would you have us go do? And I know we can support Future Kings, so maybe tell us how we can support the Future Kings. But then also, what else should we be doing? What is the action that we should be taking?
Well, I think it's multiple levels. I highly recommend supporting programs like Future Kings, not just because I do it, because I see the impact of catching young people early. And more resources for those programs, more resources, financial, more resources, equipment and reagent wise. Help us set up these training labs to affect more people, right? We affect small cohorts of people here in the DC area, but I would love to have a national model for this program that we replicated in every major city, that we have the sufficient equipment and personnel to actually do it. So that's, a multi-million-dollar commitment. We're not at that level yet, but I would love to get there. So that's definitely something to do. But then also, I would say at the other end, like my end of the pipeline, right? Where I'm in the career, right? What are the opportunities for people who are at my level that would benefit your company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I've been an executive in my own company. I've been a high level position in the government science. I've been in academia. So, I kind of have a well-rounded experience. What are opportunities for the other Dr. Cunninghams of the world out there for places like Illumina? And there are more of me. And so that's what I'm saying is like finding those folks and giving them those opportunities, because then they become the examples, all right, for others coming behind and moving up. And, as more of us emerge and kind of get towards and penetrate the C-suite in these industries, I think you're going to see a natural upward mobility. It's kind of like the NFL. I think the NFL is struggling with hiring Black coaches because they really just, I guess, don't want to do it. Right? I don't know what the real answer is. I'm not trying to besmirch the NFL, but they do have a lot of talent at the offensive coordinator level. And so everybody's kind of scratching their head like, why can't some of these folks get head coaching opportunities, right? So you got to just create that opportunity. And I know they had a rule in place trying to do it, but if you didn't really follow the rule, then it never really had the effect, right? So you really just have to create those opportunities and be very intentional. And I'll use Sheryl Sandberg's term, lean in, right? Yeah. And all your resources, everybody, all hands on deck to really evaluate, okay, why aren't we doing this, right? Why aren't we finding the folks, and really, are we doing everything we can to do it? So that's what I would say at both ends of the pipeline, not necessarily the middle, because I feel like the middle part, educationally, we have a lot of people of color and other folks going into the careers, but they're not seeing the upward mobility, so they may leave because they don't see a space for it.
Right. And I mean, that really, I mean, you hit it right on. People do, representation really does matter. It's easier to see it. I always say to my colleagues, listen, I might look at a company, and if I look at the company and think I have to blaze a trail, I might pick another company, not because there is other opportunity. So it's just considering and thinking about what that means. And as you hit the NFL example, I remember when the deal was there were no black quarterbacks.
Right.
That was a thing, right? And so then slowly but surely that started to change, and then there wasn't sort of the I'm going to say the ceiling that had been there on black quarterbacks, and now we know that that's no longer a thing.
Yeah.
And so now we're trying to, I guess make change at the head coach level, and hopefully we're on the journey to that. But I cannot thank you enough for this discussion today. It was so good and so helpful, and it's so exciting and so inspiring, the work that you're doing. And I just appreciate it and appreciate your time. So thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Have a wonderful day. Thank you. And I look forward to further conversations and wish you all the best and all the great work you're doing.
Likewise. Thank you for joining. This is Inputs to Action, and I'm Dr. Lisa Toppin. I'll see you next time. Thank you.